In our first reading, we hear from the prophet Hosea how God is going to draw his people back to him. So that means they must have gone astray, huh? I'm going to allure, the Lord says, I'm going to allure her or powerfully attract her. And that means the people, they either went astray, they got attracted to something else, or they're just distracted from God. And, the same thing happens to us at different times in our life too, as a people of God, but also just individually in our relationship with God. And so God will always do something to attract us back to him. And so he just says, how is he going to allure her? He's going to draw her, lead her into the desert, and then speak to her heart. And so there's always desert times in the spiritual life, desert times in our relationship with God as a people and individually. Now, the desert is that place of purification, and so that's just a normal part of the growth in the spiritual life. We've got to be purified and kind of weaned off of other attractions. We've got to be in the desert places, literally and physically, the place where you're dried out. When somebody is addicted to alcohol, you got to dry them out. When they're addicted to different drugs or other things, they have to go through a period of being dried out. Well, same for us in the spiritual life. Whether we're addicted to something physically or spiritually, some sin, God has to dry us out, go through a sober period, a sobering up period. And so he's going to just think of all those analogies we've gone through in the past before when we were talking about the desert. When you go into the desert, it's the place where there's nothing but the sun, right? The scorching heat. There's no comfort. There's no security. There's no even guarantee of safety. There's wild animals in the desert. You're very vulnerable out there in the desert to the weather and to attackers or to wild animals. You're vulnerable to everything. There's nothing out there. If you were to go to the desert today, there's no cell phone service, huh? No distractions in the desert because there's nothing there. And so you get totally dried out. You learn to focus on God because that's all there is. And so at first, we go through the same thing as the people of Israel did when they were in their desert journey. Remember, they were drawn out of Egypt, going through the desert, wandering around before they finally got to the promised land. And what happens? All the things maybe you don't even realize what you were hooked on, or what had hooked you, what you were enslaved to, until all of a sudden the cravings start coming out. That's what happened to Israel, right? And they began whining and grumbling because their body was craving and yearning for all these desires that they were used to in Egypt. That's what happens if we go into the desert. This is actually built into our normal way of life as Catholics. Every Friday we're supposed to be going into the desert and fasting from something, right? Every year we have 40 days of desert with Lent. Not just fasting from chocolate, but actually it's supposed to be a desert-like experience where we get sobered up and dried out. We go away from all the normal distractions of life, in a sense, so that we can tune in to God more powerfully. If we're not doing those things, well, then nothing happens in our life. And remember, the point of the desert, the point of drying out, the point of the purification is because it is so that God will speak to our hearts and we'll hear him. Think of lovers, spouses, when they are going through life, and one spouse or both spouses get attracted to somebody else, or just distracted because life is so busy. They're distracted with work, they're distracted with the home, they're distracted with the kids, and being the Uber driver for the kids, And so they get distracted from their love for one another. What do they have to do? Go on date nights. Maybe they have to just go away for a weekend to be together without the distractions. That is also like a desert, because you're leaving everything else behind. So you can tune in to your lover. God drawing powerfully Israel into the desert so he can speak to their heart. Take them away from everything. He did this different times in their history too. Even taking them away from their worship. Right? There's no temple worship here for them. No sacrifices for them. When God is drawing them into exile after they've been conquered by armies and their temple destroyed, that's also God drawing them, leading them into the desert to awaken their hearts and to speak to them. And so we're always supposed to be paying attention to the signs of the times, what's happening in the world, and realizing what is happening in the world is God is speaking to us through what's happening in the world. You know? And so if we're losing things, could it be God drawing us powerfully into the desert so he can speak to our hearts? We lost public worship for a couple of months. Could that be God drawing us into the desert saying he wasn't pleased with the worship? I want to speak to your heart. So look and see in your own life, where are you at? Maybe you're not in a desert period. Maybe you're doing great with God. Stay there. Or maybe God is drawing us out, or just drawing us out as a people, as his people, into a desert area to purify us, to wake us up, to speak to our hearts.